Welcome to the Universal Monster Podcast, the show whose notes were definitely not written less than 10 minutes ago. I'm your host, Jake, author of The Devil's League and creator of hot quality content. With me, as well as the creative host of Screenplay Archaeology, Pyramid Head, aka Bruce. How you doing?
Pretty good.
And as per usual, my other co-host, the creator of Emerald Quill Studios and directing Tour de Force, Xander. How's it going?
I'm doing good.
Well, what is this show, you might ask? Well, every month, my fine co-hosts and I break down a bunch of Universal Monster news across movies, shows, theme parks, physical media, and anything else regarding these classic monsters. And then after that, we discuss the topic and the title of the episode. So, are you ready for some news?
Yeah.
Okay, good, because here it comes. Guys, this is a behemoth of an episode. Look, there might just not even be a news segment. This is huge. Here comes the main topic today. It is about the Universal Monster tie-in books that we've read. I've compiled a bit of a list here. It looks like we have about like 10 or 12 or so of all of them. We're going to talk about the ones that at least one of us has read. It looks like Xander is going ahead here and being the guy who's read the most of them, so we'll probably lean on him pretty heavily this episode. But one caveat, we're not going to do the Skybound comic book series because I intend to read them all, and then we'll do an episode solely focused on them. So, without further ado, Return of the Wolfman comes out in 1998. Now, you two have both read this book. I never did, so last night, it was super late. I was writing something else. I was doing my own thing, and I was like, you know what? I'm going to get as educated as possible. I read the first couple chapters of the book, and I guess I'll start because I'm the least informed, and I'll pass it off to you guys. It's really interesting. I like how they kind of just pick it up directly from the end of Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein. I like how they, sum things up and move things forward. The described fight between Dracula and the werewolf, it sounds so much cooler than I remember it being depicted because it's like, he flies up on the ceiling and he's jumping around, slashing things. And then they did get to the part where he's like, then Dracula throws a vase and the Wolfman has to catch it. And I'm thinking like, oh, wait, this is that. And then I'm thinking the two dudes in like normal costumes just slowly throwing things and they're walking through rooms. And I'm like, okay. So I love that they punched it up for the book because like, why would Dracula just stand there and slowly throw a vase? But no, so I totally like that. I like how they enhanced it. It does do, I kind of want to call it like the tie-in issue where like it'll take something cinematic and then add like paragraphs and paragraphs of like internal monologue and thoughts that kind of wasn't really in the movie, or if it was like a side thing. When the Wolfman is running up to grab Dracula, his whole fucking life flashes before his eyes, and there's like a whole page of him just thinking about grabbing Dracula before he grabs. I'm like, dude, I've seen the movie, like I get it. Like relax. But and that was really fun. The whole first chapter, like the prologue, was just dope. And then the second chapter, the book spends a lot of time kind of introducing to us, the audience, who these two random characters are, because they are not Chick and Wilbur, but the two dudes on the island, the couple. And it's just like, and one's a bank teller, and this dude just loves this woman, and he's in love with this woman, and he's in love with this woman. He just loves this woman. I'm like, oh, dude. But all right, I get it, because kind of all they had going for them in that old movie was just, it's that classic trope of like, we just met, I love you, let's get married tomorrow kind of situation. So I get that
it's not even that. They just talk to each other twice. It's like the scientist dude is in the movie. He's literally just there to pour gasoline on the dock at the end. Like, he's comically useless otherwise, because Dracula doesn't even like bite him. He like bangs him on the head and knocks him out.
No, not even Dracula does that. It's a whole joke. He's like, I'm gonna do all this stuff. I'm gonna, and then the girl.
Oh, Mornay does it. That's right.
Yeah, Mornay bats him on the head. He falls down. Dracula goes, "Well done." And it's used for like a complete comedic effect, which is great.
But yeah, they do put in a lot of like, did we really need like lengthy backstory about this dude, especially since it makes him look like kind of an idiot.
And I'm gonna kind of finish my thoughts in like 30 seconds, just because this is the last like piece of info I have to add before I want to hear you guys' takes on this. It kind of picks up with the Wolfman tackling the bat down, going into the river, and basically Dracula turns back into Dracula and escapes, and he's kind of vanishes, which he can totally do. And then Wolfman's like, what the hell? Okay, well, I'm still hungry. So he runs around, and he's targeting that couple. And the Wolfman, before he does that, he sees the rowboat with Wilbur and Chick, and they jump out of the rowboat. And I'm thinking, Invisible Man's on that rowboat. I haven't gone that far, but like he better steer that shit right the fuck back around and start doing some cool shit. So I'm excited to see if they ever address or touch on that again. But no, so
Should we tell him?
well, I mean, yeah. It's a spoiler review. You can get into it if you want. So I'm excited to see where it goes.
Yeah.
I'm excited. I think this is a great setup for a cool story, and I will probably be finishing this before the start of next or the episode after that. So we can talk about that. But yeah, this is how I am.
I will say it's not too long before they give background info as like lore info as to why an Invisible Man would be there. They basically tell you where he came from, and they give you other background as to what's going on. They kind of tie it back to 2 different Invisible Man movies.
Interesting. Well, because it's not our classic Invisible Man, it's the Vincent Price version. But that also means that he would have to have been on that island with everybody and then choosing to escape right when they chose to escape. So that sounds pretty interesting how he ended up there.
As far as I remember, I don't remember him coming back later on in the book. It's only the monster and then Dracula.
Yeah, it's background references, but
yeah.
You had the opportunity.
So do you want anything of Return of the Wolfman spoiled for you, or do you want us to just
yeah, you can get into it, guys. It's
I'm not
totally
gonna let's not get too in depth. Let's talk broadly. You go ahead, you're the expert.
Okay, well, I will say first off, I actually absolutely love that first chapter. All the chapters you're talking about. For reference, your boy back in middle school and high school was a huge reader of fan fiction. And so this book does read like a fanfic, but I kind of loved that because this was like the very first Universal Monster book I had finally been able to read. And so like being able to like, yeah, okay, fine. It talks about Talbot's entire life, but I was like, fuck yeah, finally, Lawrence Talbot, yes! kind of thing when I was reading
Yay,
that.
his entire life!
He said the thing! He said the thing! Finally,
That's
someone
awesome.
references the fucking movie. But one of the things I really love that you didn't mention is that when they are fighting, it mentions how the Wolfman sees, like, I think it's when Dracula's on the wall or something, but he sees the pentagram on Dracula's body or like behind him or something. And it's like a complete reference to the first film where like he'll see the pentagram in the palm of a victim's hand. So the whole implication is this entire time is that Dracula was marked with Wolfman's pentagram cursing, which I thought was really fucking cool. Because that's something that very few things ever really touch upon in later of the series. That was just kind of dropped out of the first book or the first movie, and that's like one aspect that I've always found really interesting. I think on one hand, yes, there's like a lot of things where they'll talk about characters and kind of like build them up only for them to like kind of die in the book. But I kind of liked that because for a second there, the one thing that I really love about this book is that there's a lot of characters that you think are going to be part of it, and then they're just gone. And so instantly you have no idea who in this book is going to be like safe. There's a whole like setup. I don't know how far. I can't remember how. So you only read like the first 2 chapters, or Jake?
So
Yeah,
you're still in 1948.
Yeah, we have not gone to modern day yet.
Once like the whole background is kind of done, where there's just like a bunch of characters where you're like, okay, this is cool, and then you have no idea who's gonna live in this book. And Jeff Roven is not like he has very little bias with the characters, which, except for like the Universal Monsters themselves, like except for Lawrence and Dracula and Frankenstein monster and stuff, everyone else is like fair game, which I absolutely loved. I found it very interesting. Well, I'll gather the rest of my shots. I'll let Bruce go on.
Yeah, I think once you get past like it's mainly those first couple chapters. Like the first chapter with the fight's really good. And then there's like 2 chapters after that, which are just straight exposition. And it's a little much, but it's interesting. And then the 3rd chapter is really good because it basically covers what happens to this town in like the 50 years between Abbott and Costello meet Frankenstein and the main events of the book. And that's where it really starts hooking me. But it's just really interesting because it does some interesting stuff with the monsters, and they each get like a perspective chapter. I liked some of the additional lore they do with the Wolfman. Like, they explain that, like, the Wolfman has to kill someone every time he's the Wolfman, or else he'll start to lose control over Talbot. That was really interesting.
That does sound fun, yeah.
Yeah, he has to get at least one kill in.
But no, and it's mostly, it mostly tracks and is really good. Like, they kind of, like, gloss over some of the Frankenstein stuff because you kind of have to. The one thing that drove me crazy, though, is that they keep, like, hinting towards, like, mummy references, and they never made any sense.
They did? Like, I didn't...
Yeah, there's a character named, who's in and out of it, called Stephen Banning Jr., which is, Stephen Banning was the name of the guy from The Mummy's Hand and The Mummy's Tomb. And then there's this whole thing where it's like, oh, he once claimed he saw a mummy, and it's like, this doesn't fit the movies at all. So I guess Roven just didn't care about the mummy, much like Universal never cared about the mummy until it made money.
So I have a question then for the class. So it makes reference to the entire Universal Monster History lore. Are really just the big three in it, like, as characters?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, all right, interesting. It's not a bad decision. I'm not criticizing it, but I will say a little wind has been taken out of my sails, because to me this was described as like, oh, it's the entire history finally coming together. It's like, oh, it's the biggest parts of the history coming together. All right,
well, if you want more, you can always read the sequels if you could find them.
Xander has always yelled every time you say that. He's always flipped his top, saying, "Oh God, no."
All I'm saying is, okay. Here's the deal. One, I think calling Return of the Wolfman this is the one where all of them are in and all and stuff is a really bad way of saying it. The way I think the best way to say it is, if you loved Abbott and Costello because it had Wolfman, Frankenstein, and Dracula in it, but you wanted it to be more serious and less comedy and less Abbott and Costello, Return of the Wolfman gives you that. It is a sequel to that film, and it's faithful in that it gives you what, when you first watched Abbott and Costello, and like, you know it's a comedy, and you were like, but you're also like secretly like hoping for like some really cool scenes and stuff. Jeff gives you that. It's very much like, okay, he looked at Abbott and Costello, he's like, okay, these are the characters, let's build off that, let's continue off with what happened with Dracula, what happened with Lawrence, what happened with Frankenstein's monster. We're in modern day, how can I use that? What can I do? And he really just gives all three characters, in my opinion, they're flowers in terms of just action and like cool scenes of what they do. The monster is almost like he's definitely doesn't like have his same character that like he had in Bride of Frankenstein or the original film, but he's more of like this hulking, like almost like slasher villain kind of thing where he's just like extremely powerful, and it's really interesting how they do stuff like that.
That is how he's treated in a lot of those sequels, so I guess that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he's actually in it. He's not just on a table the whole movie.
You were saying like, oh, if you want Abbott and Costello, but not comedy, more focused on the stuff. Bro, you're speaking to the heart, my friend. I'm like, dude, that is for me. So, I am in fact excited to read the rest.
No, there are so many fight scenes. So there's that one fight scene in the beginning between Dracula and Wolfman. That's not the end of it. I promise you, there's no teasing, there's no bait and switches. You get tons of great fights. There's I don't know, it's like I want to spoil all of it because there's so many cool scenes and stuff.
I'm not gonna give a huge spoiler, but when Dracula like fully enters the scene in the modern day, he is armed. He has like a short. He has a huge fucking dagger.
Now we're talking.
He has a short long like a short sword, and it's made completely of silver.
Yeah, overall, it is a strong book.
Yeah, that's why I love the book so much, because it gives me what I wanted from Abbott and Costello. When I was a kid, I was watching the Little Monster like featurettes and stuff, and they briefly mentioned how they all met and stuff. I kept on thinking that's great. And then when I first watched the movie in college, I was like, okay, yeah, this is cool, this is good, this is interesting, but it's not exactly what I wanted. And then one night I finally stumbled across a PDF of the book, and I finished it in a day. And very rarely for me am I able to finish a book in one day. I could not put this book down. The way Jeff writes, it is very fan fiction-y, but I feel like I don't know if you would say this, Jake, but I feel like Jeff's way of writing is similar to your way of storytelling. I think very much you guys have like kind of the similar mindsets of how you want to do things in terms of like describing action and stuff.
Yeah. The one thing that kind of made me roll my eyes a little bit was, oh, you really did write in a reference to like a specific canon tie-in reference to White Zombie of all things. And like, that movie sucks though.
Oh man, the way I'm thinking about that is like, as a guy who has not read the book, so I'm an expert, is like, oh, this is like, you're not gonna. Jeff Roven didn't write any sequels. He's like, I'm full sending everything. This is the entire Universal Monsters saga in a goddamn book. Boom, here it is. So I don't know. That sounds fun.
Okay. So here's the thing. I don't know if that's for sure true, because the ending of the book does set up for a sequel. And I want, if I could ever have the clout to, I want to talk to fucking Jeff Roven and ask him, what was the plan? Because what ended up happening was not what I wanted, which was Jeff Roven left the series, some other dumbass came over and was like, fuck Lawrence Talbot, we're gonna use the Werewolf of London guy, and it's not even the same guy, we're gonna use his son who's doing his moonbeams, and for some reason Dracula is a slug zombie thing, and there's I don't read them. They're so bad from what I've read.
Well, I can't find them. I could only find a download for the third one, and I'm not going to get the third one and not the second one. Not to spoil anything, but the plot they tease at the end for the sequel to Return of the Wolfman at the end of that book kind of reminded me a little bit of the Devil's League.
Oh yeah, I guess you're right.
Yeah, but yeah, I guess that's Return of the Wolfman covered.
First of all, I can't wait to sue Jeff Roven 30 years in advance. Second, that does sound really exciting. I'm genuinely looking forward to the rest of this book now that it's been discussed. Despite, I will say the wind got out of my sails. Well, the wind's going right back in from the description of the book. So my ship's sailing. We're sailing out here. Does that wrap up our thoughts on Return?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. And the sequels.
And the sequels that no one's read or liked. But so the next book I have up is from 2004. I don't think either of you have read it. It is the novelization of Van Helsing. So
I did a long time ago.
I have in fact read this book. For context audience, I have every piece of tie-in media for Van Helsing 2004. I have the PS2 game. I have the comic book that ties into Dr. Moreau. And of course I have the novelization. Now, I do want to talk about, like, the concept of novelizing something is really interesting to me because you're working off of usually a script. Like, so usually you'll get the script for the movie while they're shooting it or after they're shooting it, and you're like, okay, you got to turn this around in a couple months. Okay, great. So, I really enjoy when a tie-in novelist takes the script and goes deeper, like, not super deep, like Return of the Wolfman, that first chapter, but like deeper into the story and maybe even some problems with the movie or some quick continuity problems. They just fix them. They don't even like fix them, but like they just kind of like add a reason why, and it's like a passing line. And if you know, you know, but if you don't, it's not important. You can keep reading the book. It's got to be accessible to a lot of different type of people. It's a very tricky art form, novelizing something. I've really studied this. So you get to Van Helsing's novelization. There are some really cool, creative things that the author is doing in reference to the Van Helsing movie. It's not a perfect novelization. There's still, I'll get to some problems later on, but right now, I want to address that, like, for example, they add a prologue, because if you're writing the story and you want to enhance the movie Well, you have the opportunity as an author to add a prologue at the start that the reader could just breeze by or actually get there and get a little more information. So the prologue is Dracula first going to Dr. Frankenstein about the project. That the opening scene of the movie is of course,
cool.
that
I
the project
remember
is
that
concluding.
now from having read it. And Elizabeth shows up, doesn't she?
Yes, it's a whole thing. And it kind of established that, like, Frankenstein's down on his money. He really needs the help, It's like a whole thing. And Dracula comes in, like, kind of saving the day for him. But it does some cool things. So one of the things that I want to point out is that when Dracula first speaks to Frankenstein, the doctor, not the guy, not the monster, it's kind of alluding to the fact that, like, the longer you stare at Dracula, like, the more, like, hypnotically entranced you get. And it's a subtle thing. And I actually did something very similar when I wrote The Devil's League. But I really appreciate what they did with that. While that's happening, there's little bits of, like, exposition that I'm like, that's interesting. So, like, one of them is, like, it was hard to place exactly where the Count's accent was from. It felt like it was from all parts of Europe, as if he's been alive for bajillions of years. And I'm thinking, that's because Richard Roxburgh's accent was heavily criticized for not being an accurate Dracula. So it's just this random hodgepodge of, like, accents from all places. I'm like, wow, they took something that the Stinkers Bad Movie Awards awarded him the worst accent for, and they took that and gave a lore-accurate reason why it would be like that. I'm like, holy shit, that's so creative.
That reminds me of the first Highlander movie, where they tried to write around the fact that, like, Christopher Lambert obviously isn't Scottish by, like, having a scene where they comment on the accent.
You know what? For the record, I think Richard Roxburgh's performance is so good, and anyone who's ever, like, criticized it just has no idea how to have fun.
It's such a fun performance. It's so good.
I'm just saying, you can't watch that movie and not love it, because you can tell Richard is having the time of his life playing Dracula.
Yes, he's like a rock star, man. It's so fun.
I don't mind him. I think there's, like, a couple scenes where Summers could have just been like, hey, you don't need to be at 12 in every moment, but especially when he's talking about how he feels nothing and is hollow and he's screaming it.
Yeah, that could have been, like,
but
a more
so
introverted. But it is fun.
I love the way he says that, though.
He does that in a lot of his movies, and we've all seen Mission Impossible 2.
Oh my
She
god.
wasn't exactly gagging for it.
Well, that's also another film where the director is just, punch it all the way up. Every shot's slow motion. Every shot's crazy gunfights and action. Like, that's a very similar style to the Van Helsing film. But there's other lines. I'm not going to sit here and list them all, but, like, there's other details. For one, my video essay on Van Helsing, where I go into, like, the oddly character-driven nature of Van Helsing, the book gets it. The book picks that up. It's like, let's go further into that. Let's explore this guy from, like, a moral point of view. I'm totally with it. So, like, this guy who wrote Van Helsing was not doing this for a paycheck. He was, like, genuinely like, I'm going to make this movie the best version of itself. And he went into it. So I really appreciate that. In terms of criticisms, I feel like it still has the, you have to write it in a couple months problem. I don't know what timetable he had, but it feels very much like this is not the final draft. Because there'll be chapters where, like, they're describing, like, yeah, this is the scene from the movie. And then the next paragraph just says, later, they walked to this section, and then they fought this guy, and now this is the scene. And I'm like, whoa, the pacing on that is like, A, you should have put a chapter break there. B, the only thing I can think of is, like, you have to... It would have hypothetically been, like, a 400-page book if you didn't condense it down to the length of the screenplay, because the story of the movie, when you write it down, it doesn't translate exactly, so... There's some like wishy-washy, pacing things, and the romance between Van Helsing and Anna is kind of as well as they handle it in the movie, where it's just, like, barely serviceable, not a whole lot of reason why, they're just two attractive people on screen, and the book just kind of runs with that, doesn't really enhance that at all. I was kind of looking for that aspect to be improved, but that's okay.
I wanted to ask, because we know from the commentary that the scene where he knocks Anna out was different.
Yes.
The way they originally shot it in the book. So does he punch her in the face in the book?
Oh my god, I don't remember.
I have two very specific things I remember about this book from when I read it 20 years ago now. And Okay.
No, keep going. I'm going to get it.
Okay. Now I remember in that. I remember in that prologue, Victor Frankenstein zooms like he notices that like Dracula has an earring, and is thinking, why the fuck does this guy have an earring? And then that stands out to me because in your MonsterCon video, Mud is like, why does he have an earring? And then I remember in that scene when he knocks Anna out, there's this whole extended fucking like dream sequence flashback of her first werewolf hunt, which I remember being not great.
Yeah, again, it goes deeper. The deeper characterizations, it's like Return of the Wolfman, where it's a positive and a negative depending on how it's handled. Sometimes you spend too long there, but if you don't spend enough time there, it feels surface level. It's kind of a double-edged sword.
Also, I remember there's a whole like Van Helsing's inner thoughts about Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, where he's like thinking about like all the stuff Hyde has done and like all the backstory. And you can tell the people who were doing the animated prequel were not talking to anybody else because it's completely different. Lines of dialogue in the book that were written for the movie but aren't in the movie, like the reference to. I really like the fact that he wrote in a lot. I wish he didn't cut this out, but there's a line Igor has at the beginning that's taken out of the movie where he says, "If they catch me, they'll just hang me again." And I'm like, why didn't you keep that in?
In the movie, when Frankenstein asks, like, why are you working for him, instead of that line, Igor's like, "You've been good to me, master, real good, but he pays me." It just completely changes. It makes Igor into this, and I get it, it's the tone of the movie, it's like this campy, ridiculous thing, but that would be a pretty interesting way to go.
Well, I mean, when you cast Benny...
If I may, gentlemen, before we continue, with that, the princess pulled her helmet on and started to charge out of the room. Van Helsing grabbed her arm, spun her around, and held one hand palm up between their faces. Then, with a single sharp breath, he blew the blue powder from his hand into her face. The princess fell backward against the wall, blah, 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 blah. So
it's not a spray gun, it's cocaine.
It's not a spray gun. So there's three iterations of this scene. There's the original scene as filmed, which is him punching her in the head, which they realized in post is it's a little misogynistic. Then they change that into the spray gun, which is a little more tame, and in the book they do it as blue powder. So I wonder, now my theory, which has changed completely, is what if the guy read the screenplay says he punches her in the head, and he's like, ooh, it's not going to play well, and he changed it his own way into blue powder. That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah, that or he was watching Farscape, and there's a character in that that blows powder in people's faces. But no, there's a couple other lines that were in the script but aren't in the movie. They're in the novelization. There's the scene where he explains, because in the movie they just walk up to Castle Frankenstein and it cuts to them inside. But there's the whole thing in the novelization where he says the line where he says, there are some who use the front door, blah 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 blah. And if you watch the blooper reel, he fucks up the line, so I'm guessing that's why it's not in the movie.
That is true. And there are those who say their line's better than I do, or something like that.
And there's an awful line, which I remember just cringing when I read the novelization, when they're drinking the absinthe in the ruined windmill, and Anna just turns on a dime from being flirty to going, "I don't need your wolf's eyes undressing me," which is in the script, it's in the novelization, but thank God that's not in the movie.
Thank God it's not in the movie. An underdeveloped romance that's okay is better than a romance that has way too many bad, cringy lines in it that might be deeper, but worse.
Is the creature from the Black Lagoon scene put back in the novel? Because I know that there's always that whole thing where there's
it's still like the movie where he fights the final bride. It's still the same as the movie.
He must have taken that out early because he talked about two different places where he wanted to put it in.
Interesting.
The one I know is that it's supposed to be in the dilapidated windmill, right?
Well, there's one version where he said it was in the moat of Castle Frankenstein, so I'm guessing there was supposed to be a scene where they swim the moat to get inside, after those who use the front door thing. But there was a storyboard artist released storyboards of the room where the werewolf cure is kept.
Yeah,
and
I have those storyboards.
After Igor locks him in, the creature comes down, kills him. And then he's in the room with them, and then the monster crashes in through the window and starts fighting her.
Yeah, it's literally that scene swapping out that third
sick.
bride for creature, and I get why they use the third bride for that, because you want to give each of them something significant to do, or at least a creative, unique death at the end of it. So that's pretty exciting. That otherwise you're just dropping that character. Maybe you're just saying that she died in the stakes and the thing blew up. So whatever.
Yeah, and also the creature is just a random thing to show up in that room.
It is a random thing. It is a random thing.
But counterpoint, creature from the Black Lagoon.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
Too. That's
and
and
there's a couple interesting things about that scene. I think they may have tested some CG for it, and that's why the bride does the weird thing with her mouth. I have a theory about that. Also, in the storyboards, Anna is not called Anna; she's called Mina.
Huh. That's interesting.
Which I don't know. I'd love to see, the first or second draft of this, but I don't think that's ever going to happen.
It's the Valerius family that Dracula's been torturing for generations. What if it was the Harker family that he's been torturing for generations? That in an earlier version, I bet you that's what it was. But yeah,
that sounds like something that Transylvania pilot would have done.
Yeah, 100,000%. But yeah. Definitely. All right, well, that's the gist of how I feel about the novelization of Van Helsing. I think Kevin Ryan did an excellent job. This is almost as good as you can possibly do for taking that script and making it into a compelling book. So he did a fantastic job.
I'm gonna have to pick it up and give it a read one time.
The next book on the agenda here, and we're immediately going back out of territory that I have not read at all. It's Dracula Asylum. This is a book that I know at least Xander's read. Bruce, is this you?
I started reading it, and I never got very far in it.
All right, so it's once again a time for Big Xandy style to just shine.
First off, we've now entered the era that I affectionately like to call the Dark Horse era, in which Universal went to Dark Horse Comics and said, we want to release books that are semi-sequels to the original movies each of the monsters were based off of. They all act as direct kind of sequels to all of them were written by different people, and all of them have their own different takes and stuff, but they're all specifically meant to be kind of alternative sequels to the film. So you won't get anything about Dracula's daughter or son of Dracula in this, but you will get a lot of Dracula. Essentially what happens is that this book takes place after World War I and before World War II and in between. There's this asylum that was built right next to Carfax Abbey.
It's the asylum from the movie.
Oh yeah, it is these. Yeah, you're right. Sorry. It's the exact same asylum, but yeah, but in the book it's written as if it's right next to Carfax Abbey. I guess that's why I got confused. There's this lady who had a fiance that was in the war, but the war kind of fucked him up, and so he's I think he's paralyzed and he won't talk to anyone, and she's like a psychiatrist and she's trying to fix him up. And while this is all happening, Dracula is slowly reforming back to what he was. And I don't know if we want to go into spoilers, but it gets pretty fucking wacky by the end of it. If you guys want me to go into the spoilers,
you can get into it.
I mean, I'll read it eventually, but who knows if I'll remember.
Okay, well, essentially here's how it is. Renfield survived, and he's this old decrepit guy who just walks around and helps out in the asylum and everything. But he's sort of lost his memory, or it's almost like he's just the nice side of him. But then at some point he stumbles back into Carfax Abbey underneath the catacombs, and there's this whole scene where the coffin's there and the stakes there, but it's just this weird mist kind of thing, and he removes the stake and Dracula reforms. And the implication that the author writes is that Dracula is so fucking evil, he caused World War I to happen in his sleep.
Wow. Okay. All right. Did he assassinate Franz Ferdinand too?
And he's so he's like, I think I have the power to influence this kind of stuff. I want to make an even worse war.
Oh my god.
Oh,
And then he does.
It gets better.
Oh no.
It gets better.
Oh,
it gets better. Mina is in the book as well, and she's one of the nurses in the asylum.
That fits.
That whole like happy ending never really stays. They were together for a little bit, but she just like it never worked out. And like Mina essentially is all like, you ruined my life, and she tries to kill Dracula, but they can't because Dracula is either Jesus Christ or he's not Jesus Christ. They want to kill Dracula, but some people are saying we can't because he's actually actual Jesus himself who died on the cross and took in all his sins. And because he took all his sins, that's because he's evil. But he could also not be.
Somebody watched Dracula 2000 where he's actually Judas Iscariot and went, I could do one better.
Wow. Wow.
But he could also not be Jesus. It's all like, what if he is, what if he isn't? Because if he gets killed, then all the sins release and suddenly you have what could be described as the apocalypse in terms of what the book says. So at the end, Dracula doesn't get killed. I think he gets staked again or something. But it's like, there's this whole like back and forth of whether or not he is. It's probably one of the most wildest ones. I don't know, man. That was fucking crazy.
It sounds like this writer had a ton of ideas that could have been interesting, and then Dark Horse was like, write me a Dracula book. And he just went, okay, pour it all in there.
You know what it sounds like? It sounds like I was just going to say, this sounds like the Michael Bay Transformers problem where, like, every significant event in human history, actually it was just Dracula the whole time. The Bible, Dracula did that. World War I and II, oh, that's actually just Dracula fucking around.
Paul Whitcover, bless this man's heart, he wrote some really cool vampire scenes, but I swear, if you told me Paul just really wanted to write a World War I story about, like, a girl trying to bring back her lover from PTSD, I believe it. And Dark Horse was like, all right, but put Dracula in it.
Given what you have described about this book, I feel like Dracula Asylum is such a lame, like, understated title. It should be like, Dracula, bro, the apocalypse about to happen. Holy shit, read the rest of this book. It's crazy. That'd probably spoil a little bit.
I mean, Jesus Christ Vampire Hunter is already a movie. Might as well make Jesus Christ Vampire.
That's the title that this book needed. That's the exact unchanged title. They should just plaster it on this book.
Once Renfield's back, he has, like, a bunch of rats, like, hanging out around him, like, on his shoulders and stuff. And he's, like, this whole cripple and stuff. But he's also, like, there's this whole other scene where he's like, dude, I've served you. You still haven't given me what you promised. And Dracula's eventually like, all right, fine, you're right. Fuck it. I'll make you a vampire fully.
Yeah, I was just expecting like a fun like tie-in novel about some random thing in the Dracula lore. Maybe it connects Dracula and daughter. I don't know. But it's just the most batshit fucking premise of all time. Wow.
If you thought that was ready, you're not ready for the Mummy.
I'm not.
I want to read that one. I want to read that one because I don't know anything about it.
All right. Well,
okay.
Let's move on. Next? Let's move on to Frankenstein: Shadow of Frankenstein. Somebody tell me how Frankenstein is actually the guy who built the pyramids and made the dinosaurs go extinct. So.
Sadly, no. I actually have this one. So.
Okay. All right. Who wants to? You guys can take it away.
Actually. Give your quick thoughts, and then I'm just gonna take off my headphones for when you tell me any of the weird random plot things, because I do actually want to stay spoiler free. So just thoughts, and I'll take headphones off.
It is nowhere near that weird. Like, this is actually pretty standard, and it's been like over a decade since I've read this, but I remember a fair amount of it. But basically, Frankenstein: Shadow of Frankenstein. Get a better look at it.
Bad title, by the way. They say Frankenstein twice.
Yeah, it's because of branding, but it's actually really good. It's what it does is it picks up from where Bride of Frankenstein ends. Essentially, what it does is it starts to fill the gap between bride and son. Because if you watch those two movies, there's notable inconsistencies between the two. And it
Right.
doesn't get all the way there because it leaves room for a sequel. But basically, the premise of this thing is that Henry Frankenstein and Elizabeth, they leave the Frankenstein village, they go to London, and the monster who has survived the explosion, they don't really fully address the bride, presumably because she was getting her own book. But he follows them there, and essentially what happens is that even though it's been decades, Jack the Ripper shows up. And the idea
Oh
being is that
yeah, that's right.
Jack the Ripper, his killings were a means of, how to explain this. He was stealing organs to do some kind of mad science black magic thing to make himself live forever.
Okay.
Only now it's wearing off, and he's starting to kill again. And then he realizes once he finds the monster and he finds Henry Frankenstein that his science might actually be able to make it permanent. It's actually a really cool story from what I remember. Like it picks up on stuff from the movies that kind of got forgotten about, like Henry's friend Victor from the first movie, the guy you call Clark Gable in the watch along. He comes back, even though Bride of Frankenstein completely forgets that he even exists. And he comes back, and I won't spoil what he gets brought back for, but it's interesting. There's a horror reference in here, which, have either of you guys seen the Japanese movie Audition?
That movie is on my list, and I have been told that there is a significant twist in it. So I'll get that far when I get that far, but I do want to watch that.
I'm not going to tell you what it is, but there's a specific item that gets used in the climax of that movie that turns up here, and I'm like, oh, is he going to do what I think he's going to do? He does it. Xander, I'm going to mention what the hook is for the ending, so take your headphones off.
Okay.
But so the ending to this doesn't quite get you the Son of Frankenstein, because obviously they were planning on writing another one.
Yep, sure.
But basically what it is that Henry Frankenstein gets his hands on what Jack the Ripper had, what the science he was using, and he starts getting ideas, and he actually goes. It ends with him on the boat going back to his hometown. He's going to continue his experiments again. That it's given him the itch.
Interesting.
So presumably it's going to explain why his lab is like a hell of a lot closer to the castle than it was in the original movies and stuff.
Okay.
Like
All right.
but sadly, we never got it.
That sounds fun. All right. Xander, you're good. It wasn't a huge spoiler. It was pretty interesting. It's like the point of the book, but it wasn't like, Dracula shows up and they fight level spoiler, so no worries.
No, I don't think any of these have crossovers in them. But I actually emailed the author and asked him about, if he would have done a sequel, and he said, sadly, he couldn't do it because Dark Horse Press dissolved.
Oh, shit.
The books didn't sell, so he never got to do the sequel. But if he had gotten to do a sequel and he had completely bridged the gap to Son of Frankenstein, like, I basically would have considered this canon.
That would be so dope.
But I just love that it basically is just another Frankenstein movie with the Frankenstein monster and love from the original 2-3 movies. Because once you get the Ghost of Frankenstein, he basically becomes a different character by the end of that movie.
Yep.
And so, yeah. And his whole storyline in the movie is good because he gets taken in by, like, this group of prostitutes who are being stalked by the Ripper. And he actually finds, like, a home in a community and stuff. It's actually, it's really good. It's worth reading.
Next on the docket is, this is a book that Bruce and I have read and Xander has no idea about. The Wolfman Hunter's Moon. I lied. It's gonna just be it.
No, I haven't gotten to that one yet. I will say I read the description on the back of it, and I'm like, I don't remember the Wolfman being a servant of Satan.
Well, the Wolfman actually started World Wars 1 through 7, Bruce. All right, so let's get into it.
So the Wolfman's actually the cause of the Vietnam War.
That's why they did it.
No.
Oh, so it was the Wolfman who did the Gulf of Tonkin incident.
Exactly. You watch Platoon, one of them's about to turn into a werewolf off screen. It's huge. It's a different way to see the movie.
I'm gonna be biased and say this is the best of all the Dark Horse books. If you read all the reviews and stuff, a lot will say this book's so fucking boring. Barely any Wolfman scenes. It's all just Lawrence Talbot doing stuff, which to the average man, yeah, that's probably boring. to the man who's the fan of not only the Wolf Man, but the man part of the wolf, Lawrence Talbot, this book is fucking awesome. Lawrence Talbot, after he is killed, he wakes up in the back of a van, or in the back of a car that people are getting shot out, and he is taken in by a group of people that say that they are protectors of werewolves, and they provide a sanctuary and a place where a werewolf can exist without hurting other people. They let him hunt this deer. They like have like this own like private forest and stuff, so that like when the time comes for him to transform, you know, there's like this deer and he's like able to like just kind of hunt it. And the way that the werewolf, it's also interesting that every author who has written for the Wolfman has a different interpretation of how Lawrence experiences the werewolf transformation and like experiences all that scenes. And for Hunter's Moon, it's very much like a dream. It starts as a prologue for how the entire werewolf mythos began, which was basically this pirate came and like ransacked a church, like a small church off an island. They ransacked and killed all the creatures, and essentially God punished him by like turning him into a werewolf or something, and that like curse went down into a millennia of generations. The other thing is that there's this whole other group of people who are specifically intent on hunting and killing every werewolf. If we're ready to get into the spoilers, this is where it gets insanely wild. The sanctuary for werewolves is not actually a sanctuary for werewolves. They are devil worshippers. And Lawrence, and so what ends up happening is that throughout the book, like the caregivers and stuff of Lawrence, they're getting killed by like the werewolf hunters and stuff. And so like there's like a bunch of people that end up dying and stuff, and the whole place gets attacked. And so Lawrence and this woman escape to this town, and she eventually gets killed too. Lawrence ends up waking up in this giant like amphitheater. Every character that was killed is still alive because they all have pacts with the devil. And the whole thing is that Lawrence is going to be sacrificed to bring back the devil to the world. And this is all in the final like few chapters. Shit gets crazy. So the actual werewolf hunters were trying to kill Lawrence to stop this devil worshipping cult. What saves this is that while this is happening, of like Lawrence is on this table and they're about to sacrifice him as a werewolf, and like it kind of goes into like a meta like kind of thing where like Lawrence internally goes into himself and he's like walking through the forest and stuff, and essentially he finds, or he sees like the wolf inside him basically, and he's like, all right, fuck it. We will like, it's like this internal thing where it's like, okay, they decide to become one. It's no longer the wolf is trying to, you know, take over the side of Lawrence and like always being in control and stuff. It's like as it says, it like the wolf like jumps into him and something like that. Lawrence becomes the Wolfman, completely in control. Woo! And massacres the entire devil cult. Okay, and it is so fucking cool.
That does sound dope.
It's so fucking awesome because he wakes up and he's like, oh shit, and he's just slashing through them. He fucking like, it's like
hell
a whole
yeah
fucking thing.
Hell yeah.
I think it's a really solid book. I think it's really cool because it's very much a character book, and Lawrence like introspectively on like who he is as a person and like what he's done and stuff. And again, as I've always touted, the thing about the Wolfman that I love is that there's two sides. There's the wolf and there's the man. And this one very much goes into the man side of that Wolfman, and I love that.
Interesting. It does set it apart. It does sound unique in the Wolfman canon there. So that is pretty interesting.
It very much is.
I like those two separate cults that are hidden societies that are all hinging themselves on the Wolfman. Like I like that
Yeah.
there's like the two warring factions of underground
Yeah,
societies.
it sounds very Assassin's Creed.
Yeah, it's pretty fun.
It essentially is, and it's a lot of fun. And I mean, because like Dracula, Asylum, Frankenstein, again, they can tie into the movies. Asylum's a little weird, but you could still like kind of do it. Hunter's Moon straight out basically implies, yeah, they're branching timelines. There's a multiverse.
Damn, that's nuts. All right, well, first of all, that does sound like what Dracula Asylum tried to do, but this is a little more, effective about it. Because it's
less out there.
It's less the Wolfman did everything in history. It's a little more like let's go batshit at the end, though. So that sounds fun.
Yeah.
Speaking of batshit at the end, from what you've described, Xander, the Mummy Dark Resurrection is up next. So it's time to dig our wrapped up, petrified hands right into this one and tear it open, that casket. So get into it. Let's go.
Resurrection is very interesting. So essentially, this is a sequel tie-in to the original Mummy. This has to do exclusively with Ardith Bay.
Yay!
Essentially, there's this guy who, Josh. Josh's dad and like his grandfather were in the trying to find like the tomb of Anck-Sinnamun and stuff, and they had disappeared, and the family's completely rich and stuff. He funds the dig for finding Anck-Sinnamun, and he's like, okay, I'm gonna go to Egypt. And there's this whole thing where it's like there's this curse. I think there's a curse going on where like our family's like kind of dying and stuff. And so he goes to Egypt. He really wants to like get immersed in the culture and stuff. So he goes down to, I think, Cairo or something. And Ardith Bay he runs into, and Ardith Bay's like, hey, let me show you how the culture. So he takes him into it's this really insane scene where he takes him into this restaurant and like a private room. And they're like smoking hookahs. He has like this strange like trip where he's eating this food, but it's like blood, and there's like Anubis, and there's like all like these body part stuff. He comes back, and essentially the entire book is like his family slowly getting killed off one by one through the mummy's curse of Ardith Bay. And there's like a lot of really insane like just death scenes. There's this one where it's this woman, and it's almost like a Final Destination kind of thing where like this woman's in a car in like New York. She's one of the relatives, and the car crashes. Jackals crash in and eat her and her son alive or something like that.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, it has some of the darkest deaths I've read in a book, which are really good dark deaths. Like this gives you that kind of like mummy horror that you would want. So essentially, Ardith Bay, the implication is that he has sex with her, impregnates her, and she ends up giving birth to like a new Egyptian god. I don't like Ardith Bay gets killed in the same way like where like they like pray to Isis, like Josh prays to Isis like fucking help, and like Isis like fucking goes like bam on like Ardith Bay, and the book ends with like him coming out and he sees like this like it's like the body where like it has like the eagle wings and stuff, and it just flies off, and like it's just really fucking random the ending of the book.
Ooh,
that sounds awesome. All right, I'll just chime in here. The first half, it's kind of boring. Didn't really care. Love that ending. That almost makes me want to pick up the book on its own just to get that far and be like, yo, that's like the dopest way they could have done that. Well, with that amazing twist down, we're going to move on to, and they do count as books, apparently, but these are 3 scripts that were published. that Bruce has read all of. I have read one of them. I'll opine when the time comes. But Bruce, you want to talk about Dracula's Daughter, the Wolfman versus Dracula, and the Invisible Man?
All right. Well, Dracula's Daughter, and I have to mention, just do my due diligence. The guy who wrote this book, Philip J. Riley, doesn't have like the best reputation amongst like the sort of Universal monster historian people. But basically, what this is, this one has been authenticated that this is like all real stuff. This is talking about like Dracula's Daughter before the movie, and like all the things they tried. And the first thing in here is a treatment that was written, and it was like RKO apparently wanted to get in on the Dracula money, so they bought the rights to the short story Dracula's Guest, and they developed this whole treatment where it's like Van Helsing goes to Transylvania to deal with the brides of Dracula, but he misses a coffin which has Dracula's daughter in it. And basically it seems like the whole premise John Balderston wrote here was that Dracula's daughter is like a bondage freak, and she like whips her like men she enslaves. He's like, we can totally get away with this because like we can do whatever we want to men. It won't offend the delicacies. And what's so strange about this one is that they don't make it, and they eventually just sell whatever stake they have to Universal, and there's speculation that they had no intention of actually making a movie. They just wanted to fuck with Universal and get some money from them.
Right.
And so then Universal goes along with it, and then they basically pressure James Whale into agreeing to direct. He says, I'll only do it if R.C. Sheriff, who worked on The Invisible Man, will do the script. And he writes this script, which has this lengthy historical prologue where we see Dracula get turned into a vampire by a wizard. And it's this whole thing where, like, Dracula is like this evil nobleman who's just ravaging his land and, like, fucking up the peasants, stealing their women, robbing them, and holding, like, these huge banquets.
So this takes place after he was Jesus, of course.
Yes.
Okay.
And eventually they can't do anything against him, and so they go to this wizard who apparently would have been played by Boris Karloff. And he goes up there, he turns all the other nobles into animals, and he turns Dracula into a vampire. And there's this whole thing about this peasant girl that Dracula kidnapped and is like his victim. And he goes like, oh, I shall think of you like you're my daughter. And she also gets turned into a vampire, apparently. And then it jumps ahead to after Dracula, where these two couples are traveling through Transylvania, and they decide to go explore the ruins of the castle, the two men. They go explore the ruins of the castle, and there's this really creepy scene where they see Dracula's ghost walking around, and one of them gets grabbed by Dracula's daughter and made into a slave. And when they go back to London, the two fiancés, and I think his brother or whoever he is, they meet Van Helsing, and I'm going to check and see if they call him Van or Von Helsing in this. He's Van Helsing.
Okay.
And they basically they team up with Van Helsing to rescue this guy from Dracula's daughter. And there's this big climax on board a boat that's going back to Transylvania. And it's pretty good.
So let me ask a couple questions here. Was this script written like before the script that Dracula's daughter ended up being was written?
Yes.
Okay.
Because the script ended up getting like rejected by the censors for being too outrageous.
Sure. So this script also assumes they could get Bela back.
Yes.
Okay, which they ended up not doing for the sequel. So interesting.
Well, from what I've known is that it was supposed to be Bela and Boris Karloff and Henry Clive, and they were going to do James Whale. But then once James dropped out, Bela was like, I don't want to do it anymore.
Understandable.
And I've read, and there's some speculation that James Whale really didn't want to make Dracula's daughter, so he deliberately had the script as ridiculous as he possibly could so it wouldn't pass the censors.
Yeah.
That's
From what
awesome.
I also hear is that because Dracula's Guest is just basically the original segment of John Harker being there and everything, but like turned into a short story. The other studio had the rights to that book, but Universal had the rights to everything else. So in order to keep the rights, they had to make a movie based off Dracula's Guest. Otherwise, they'd have to pay for the privilege to make like a sequel. I don't know, it was some random rights bullshit or something.
Okay.
Yeah, and Dracula's Guest isn't even that part of Dracula. It's before the book begins. Like, it's a whole incident that's completely, like, unconnected, almost, with Jonathan. It's a nameless protagonist who presumably is, like, an earlier drafts version of Jonathan Harker going on a little adventure in Germany before he even gets to Dracula.
Well, it's funny because, like, I'm not too hot on the final version of Dracula's Daughter. This does sound like it would pique my interest. It's at least a little more out there. The ghost of Dracula showing up is just on its own. That's, like, a weird thing to imagine being filmed, you know? That does sound interesting. But what's more interesting must be the second script, which I have read. I'll opine on this one. The Wolfman versus Dracula. I guess I'll let you start, Bruce, and then I'll share my thoughts on it. That's all I'll say.
Well, The Wolfman versus Dracula is a script that apparently is following up House of Frankenstein based on the way it opens. Like, it actually connects to a previous movie. Go figure.
Okay.
And basically, they find Talbot's body. He gets revived. He becomes the Wolfman again. He ends up traveling to, like, this village where he meets, like, he's like an innkeeper or something. And he meets his daughter, and the daughter, like, falls in love with him, and he agrees to marry the daughter, but under the condition that he tells his father that he's a werewolf and says, "I'll marry your daughter if you'll fucking kill me." And then Dracula is also there, and he's also pursuing the daughter. I don't remember a whole lot of the Dracula stuff in this script, if I'm being honest with you.
It was very Talbot focused, which I guess makes sense because he's usually the protagonist of these.
Yeah, it's very Talbot focused. And I guess we could just get to the big thing. There is no Wolfman versus Dracula.
I know! Okay, so, like, the third act climax is, because a lot of the movie is Lon Chaney Jr. and random bimbo number 7 having a romance and falling in love and, oh, we want to get married the next day. So, the third act climax is him and her. I don't know if they're, like, in a house or if they're in, like, a field, but there's this big, I assume, prosthetic bat, like the big fucking bat thing that's, like, the size of a guy, that occasionally swoops down over them, and they have to duck and go, "Whoa, there's Dracula!" And they're running through, and the bat keeps swooping down. That's all of the action and climax in the film. And I don't even remember how it ends. I was so divested. I was like, I'm so glad they did not call the film... This is worse than Meets the Wolfman, because that just says that they meet while showing a picture of them fighting. This one says versus. Like, that's even more of an offense to not even have them do anything at all at the end.
In fairness, I believe the Dracula versus the Wolfman wasn't the actual script name back when this was written. I think that's just what the person.
What was the name?
Script itself.
Well, I mean, on the actual retyped script page, it says Wolfman versus Dracula.
All right, never mind.
That's all we got to go off of. I mean, it's not called, like, the chilling air of the wolves and the bats. Like, no, it's called We're Fighting, Fuck You. So
yeah, doesn't Talbot, like, grab the bat and go like, "Oh," and that's basically it?
Yeah, that's the extent of it, which I'm sure it would have looked so good if they shot it back in 1940 whatever. So
he's not even a werewolf when he fights this giant bat.
That's the other thing too. It's just the guy. Like, it's not even like, oh, I don't know. And
what's also, the guy who wrote this, Bernard Schubert, he wrote The Mummy's Curse, which is the Mummy movie where they go, "Oh, it's in Louisiana now," for some reason.
Yeah. I don't know. The title that would have been true is Larry Talbot versus a Big Bat. So that's what it should have been called based on what it is. But no, I read this script and I was like, thank Christ. This would have been the worst crossover. I would have hated this more than, like, half or at least most of the Abbott and Costello movies. I would have hated this more.
I'm wondering where the timeline is in which this movie was made, and it's the same podcast, but I'm touting how Wolfman versus Dracula is an underrated masterpiece.
Apparently, they were considering shooting it in Technicolor.
Ooh.
They also apparently considered having Lon Chaney Jr. play both parts again.
Of course they did, of course, but they obviously would have chose not to do that.
Yeah.
And at least according to Philip J. Riley, they were talking to Lugosi to play Dracula.
They were talking to who? Sorry, you cut out.
They were talking to Lugosi.
Really?
Yeah.
Because I would assume they would just carry over John Carradine. So.
No, Lugosi would have replayed him.
Because if it's a sequel to the Frankenstein movie, then I don't know. But regardless. All right, well, the last script, which admittedly I have not heard of, is Invisible Man. Bruce, is this a script that was before the film Invisible Man 1932 or 3?
It's before. Okay, so this is what's weird about this book, is that this is early stuff before they made the movie. It's not even really full screenplays. It's a bunch of different like treatments and like storyline ideas. So Boris Karloff was attached to play the Invisible Man. James Whale was attached to direct. And even though H.G. Wells was alive and had script approval, they have all these bizarre ideas where, like, James Whale writes a treatment, which then gets expanded by another writer, where it's this weird thing where it takes place in Europe somewhere, where it's a guy who gets... He's, like, apparently, like, this great genius or something, who gets in an accident, is disfigured, and decides, I can't live in society anymore. I'm going to wrap myself in bandages and live in a tomb. Like, I'm abandoning my fiance, all this shit. He prays to God to turn himself invisible so no one has to see how ugly he is, but apparently the prayer lines get crossed or something, and instead it gets answered by Satan, who turns him invisible. He becomes an asshole who goes around killing people. He rapes his fiance.
Ugh.
And then they eventually die. It's a weird plot. And then eventually it gets rejected by Universal, doesn't go anywhere. James Whale leaves. And then they go through all these other plots, which I can barely remember what most of these are about.
So let me ask you a quick question here. Does that script and some of the others, do they say based on the book by H.G. Wells? Because literally nothing from that book carried over to what you just said.
Yes, look, okay, this one says... Well, this one says, the first James Whale one says, by James Whale, star Karloff. The expanded one says, The Invisible Man by H.G. Wells. Suggested picture treatment by James Whale and Gouverneur Morris.
Well, what it is that there's another book
that is
about an invisible character, and they basically wanted to essentially do what Kubrick did with the Shining. They just wanted the name, but they wanted to like make it a lot more like just more actiony or whatever. So they were basing a lot of it off of this other book that had to do with like an invisible guy terrorizing with like invisible rats and stuff like that. It was a whole random thing.
Okay, well, I mean,
but luckily H.G. Wells was like, "What the fuck are you doing?"
Yeah,
no.
If I'm the author, like, yeah, you can take creative liberties, but at a certain point, it's like you're just using my title to do something completely unrelated.
Yes, the book was called The Murderer Invisible by Philip Wiley, which is
there you go.
It's on Audible. I haven't read it, but that's later. We get John Balderston, who's another one of these writers who comes in, and I'm just going to read the first paragraph of his memo where he gives the plot. During 17 years of work on his invisibility formula, Carpenter, a recluse, ugly and friendless, decides if he can to make himself invisible and enforce his view on social and political reform by punishing the guilty in high places and creating a reign of terror. Then there's like a treatment written by John Huston, of all people.
I don't know. None of these sound like they would actually be better than the Claude Rains movie.
Yeah, and this continues the whole Carpenter idea. Then there's a Richard Shayer treatment, which just starts with a fucking octopus in an aquarium. It's a guy called Honan who becomes invisible. I think this is the Murderer Invisible one. And there was apparently another one which isn't in this book, where it was like a Scarlet Pimpernel type thing, where a guy like turns invisible and then goes to like Soviet Russia to rescue people who are being hunted by like the revolutionaries or something. I don't fucking know.
That's so strange. Maybe they're hunted by the same people that were hunting the werewolf in Hunter's Moon.
Yeah. And what's weird about this one is that on the last page it says that because so many of these are like incomplete treatments that don't have an ending or whatever, he says, "Oh, I'm going to include the shooting script of the film," and then it's not in here.
I don't know. Of the three scripts, that one, or the three books that you brought up, that one is the most interesting to think about. I'll just say that. Wolfman vs. Dracula is disappointing, and then Dracula's Daughter is just, well, I think it's better than the movie based on what you just said, but like, it's definitely not that weird as the like Invisible Man like praying to God and the wires get crossed to Satan, so now he's an evil guy, and he just like that just sounds so outlandish.
the shooting script is in there. It's just that while they were printing it out, they ran out of ink, so they had to use monocane.
No.
It was the only way. Sorry. All right. Well, with those three masterpieces of cinema that never got made down, we're gonna talk about one of the last ones up here, which is The Testament of Lawrence Talbot. Xander, you said you had some like impassioned thoughts on the subject. Bring it on.
I don't remember who the author actually is, but The Testament of Lawrence Talbot is essentially my probably any Lawrence Talbot Wolfman fan's dream book. There's this guy who finds in an attic a Talbot's diary journal that he wrote after the events of House of Dracula. And so essentially what he finds out is he's like the author is like, okay, so I found like this thing and I was reading it and it just made me do like a huge deep dive history on all these events that have been happening and stuff. And so it starts with what Frank himself, like, he basically makes himself just this guy who like is just like filling in the gaps and stuff, but also rewriting everything that he's found. And what I find interesting is that he invites the reader in the beginning that skip any chapters you'd like, read this and whatever. So he almost does it like how you did, Jake, where like in the book it's like, these are different stories, you may read them in whatever order you wish. So he invites that, which I liked, because in the very beginning it's like the first chapter is, let's go deep into the history of the Talbot family. There's that one line that Sir John says, like the Red Talbots. So he kind of expands on that and like the different Talbot families. I have no idea what that part is because I was like, I want to get to Lawrence's stuff, so I skipped that chapter. I took the author's advice. Lawrence ends up getting engaged with the girl, with the nurse at the end of House of Dracula, and they go back to Langwelly, back to Talbot Castle, and they're preparing, like, they're getting settled in, they're getting prepared to get married and stuff, and she's like, to be able to like get over this side, maybe it would help to write a memoir or like a biography of yourself. What is interesting is that how Frank writes the Wolfman, for how like he experiences werewolfism, is that he's experiencing it and it's almost like a high. Like once he kills something, it feels amazing. He's able to run, he's able to like just like feel the wind and everything. He almost can't control the urge to kill. It's just kind of there, despite the fact that he knew it was wrong as a werewolf. But then obviously as a human, the regret comes back. But I find that really interesting because it's just like it's cool that like desire is there and just like that kind of like that mindset and stuff. And throughout the book, it's like as he's meeting these other characters, the werewolf inside him is almost like fucking with him and stuff, and he's like, I want to kill this person, like I want to tear into this woman that we're looking at right now. And Lawrence is like, no, we can't fucking do that, stop doing that. And so when he comes back to life, it like kind of like goes into like him. There's a long gap in between like in between Wolfman and Frankenstein meets the Wolfman, and even in between Frankenstein meets the Wolfman. Like it goes deeper into that like road trip he goes on with Maleva. The other thing that's interesting is that he, before running into Maleva, he finds this college of like scientists and everything that's ran by the guy from Werewolf of London, not the main guy, but the other dude who
Yogami.
Yogami. So he runs into Yogami, who's like just jovial, really nice to him. He's like, no, we have a way to fix you with like this flower thing. And while he's there, Lawrence like sees Dr. Dr. Edelman and Dr. Neiman. Yes, Neiman and Edelman, who are both trying to study, who are like going to college there, and they're both trying to like want to like figure out different parts of Frankenstein's whole thing. But one night it goes wrong, and the flower no longer works, and Lawrence turns into the Wolfman, accidentally attacks Yogami, and runs off. And so the implication is that Lawrence caused the whole Werewolf of London thing to happen, and so so he's the cause of that.
That's funny.
They address why Bela's werewolf looked more like a dog, and the implication is the longer the transformation curse continues, the more animal and werewolf you become. But the thing is, because Lawrence keeps on dying, that's like between death, that doesn't count. So it's almost like the curse's evolution is in a stasis when he's dead. So that's why he's both half man, half beast. Whereas with Bela, he was still alive throughout. So he was constantly turning more and more werewolf. And the implication is that, I guess, eventually, as Maleva says, is that eventually you just become a full wolf and you don't like turn back.
Like the Jack Nicholson movie.
Yep.
Yeah, essentially. Which I'm not a big fan of. I like the idea that like the werewolf curse afflicts everyone differently.
So is the ending of the book that Lawrence Talbot like did the moon landing or something, or is there a different outlandish?
No, actually, there is no outlandish thing. The most outlandish thing, every time Lawrence dies, he becomes this spirit who's almost he's almost in purgatory. And so he's just like this spirit that's in darkness, and he watches other spirits pass on into the afterlife. And so like he'll hear the voice of his father or of Gwen or like someone else. But then what it talks about is that these two other spirits that are throughout his time in the darkness come back, rise back and forth from that. And one is described as the Frankenstein monster, and the other one is described as Dracula. One is just pure hatred and evil, and the other one is just like this solemn thing that just kind of is like going through life, which is probably one of the most interesting like kind of things, just this idea of like the dark void, and that's where the monsters like spirits kind of reside while they're dead, quote unquote. And then one night all hell breaks loose. Someone is attacking people in Lanwelly Village, and Lawrence thinks it's him, from what I can remember, but it ends up being that Dracula came back, had started killing people in Lanwelly, finds the nurse girl again, brings her back, turns her into a vampire, and throughout this is when Lawrence first, again, retransforms into the werewolf. He ends up as the werewolf killing her, and almost killing Dracula, but Dracula escapes. Next day, Lawrence wakes up, remembers what the fuck happened, and goes, I am going to hunt fucking Dracula down.
Well, it worked well for him the last time that he did that, so.
Yeah, exactly. Unlike a giant bat or anything, he backtracks through everything to try to figure out. He runs into he goes to where like Carfax Abbey was, figures out what's going on, and it kind of goes on into like a cliffhanger ending. We never know what happened. The last thing is that him having breakfast with Chick Yun, and they're like, we're gonna go into Dracula's castle, and hopefully something happens. And the author writes, that was the last diary entry. No one, I don't know what ever happened to that Lawrence Talbot guy.
All right. That does sound like a wild version of events there. I like how, much like Return of the Wolfman, it just continues the narrative and tries to give more of a conclusion.
It branches every movie and stuff. There's other implications. They talk about the Frankenstein films. And essentially in between the diary entries, Frank, as the author, is giving his research that he's found. Like, for example, the doctor woman in Abbott and Costello, I think, worked for the German Nazis or something like that, and it's all into that. It goes into what happened to Gwen. It talks about the Frankenstein family, and it's like filling in all the gaps between the movies and everything. Like he's doing like research papers and stuff, and like just deep diving into like who this character is and what that person and what they did and what he found out about this and that and what. So that it's a very interesting read.
It's outlandish, but like it's also like a little more plausible than a lot of the other stories that we've been hearing so far. So that's really good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, he did a lot of research.
I mean, as plausible as any of this stuff's gonna be.
That just about does our show, except for the fact that there's one more book that no one's addressed yet, because it's the most recent of all of the Universal Monster tie-ins, and you can't even say it doesn't count because Testament of Lawrence Talbot is not, in fact, officially sanctioned by Universal, so neither is The Devil's League from 2023.
I always eat what I kill, Gwen. You're here in this cell because no game of any hunt could come close to what you are. You are irreversibly one of them. They are the Devil's League. And they are the greatest game in the world.
The greatest book ever written, bestowed upon mankind. Nah, I mean, it's all right. But, like, I have had a few quick passing discussions with each of you. Xander and I, on his show, did like an hour and a half long big talk about it and what he thought about it and stuff like that. Bruce, I don't think we've had like a full-on discussion about it. What the hell are your thoughts on this crazy cockamamie author's ideas about Universal Monsters?
I mean, I liked it. I mean, it's been like a year and a half since I read it, but yeah, I remember liking it. I thought the short story structure was cool. I thought, the way everything tied together was good. Some of your takes on the different concepts were really interesting. Like, the way you spun off the ape woman was an interesting idea.
Yeah, it's something I've always wanted to do.
Yeah, that Jake guy really fucking loves the ape woman. I don't know what
he really needs to get her out of the stories. She's just invasive, Get her out of here.
The werewolf stuff was good. Honestly, everything was actually fairly well done. The only thing that kind of tripped me up is that it wasn't clear to me at the beginning that Wayland, it wasn't clear to me that he was Australian at first because he's like in Massachusetts. And
he's Australian?
Yes.
Yeah, he's Australian.
And then partway through the book, he starts calling people mate, and I'm like, what? But other than that, he's Australian by way of Massachusetts and Mexico, apparently.
Yeah. So I wrote in the backstory. I didn't like repeat the exposition and stuff, but I did write in their backstory that it's obviously a very wealthy family, and ethnically he's Australian because Australia and Africa have big game hunting, which is what his dad was sort of like bestowing onto him, like to be the next big game hunter of like, elephants and stuff like that. Stuff you're not really supposed to, but you can. Stuff that's endangered, but, going in that ilk. Massachusetts is where it starts because when his dad dies, all of his holdings around the world, he has to like basically dissolve them and then choose one or two to stay at. And he ends up deciding on Mexico for various reasons. But, so he's a man of the world. A man of the world, you could say. And plus the story gets pretty international as it goes along. All the stories are all over the world, so kind of fits that he would have that like power, money, and sway and skill set to be just all around the world. So yeah, I'll go off a little bit just about like what went into it. It was the kind of thing where the first idea I had was something in the ilk of Return of the Wolfman, where it's like, I could just continue the stories. A, I don't have the rights. B, even if I did, Return of the Wolfman exists. So I found that exists. Like, even if I wanted to and could, I'm all set. That's trodden territory. I'll just let that be. So this was the next step for me, which is like, okay, well, let's just make it fully original, have them inspired by certain aspects of those characters, but for legal reasons, they're very distinct. Also, they're all based on fair use characters anyway. I could have ripped them all off if I wanted to, but I went original with it. And this is basically the story that I have kind of been expecting from Universal to see. And this is like what they could be doing even to this day, and have for like 100 years have just chosen not to. Like, this is the big dropped ball to me, and I did a deep dive. You'll notice the books that I've talked about that I have actually read or started to read are all crossovers, because the research I did for Devil's League were monster mashes. So like Van Helsing tie-in, Wolfman versus Dracula strange script. I wanted to know every instance where multiple Universal monsters met each other, right? So I could fully educate myself on what has been done and what hasn't. And this book, I can tell you for a fact, as an expert in the subject, this book has not been done. This is the first and only of its kind so far.
If you want to know all my thoughts, there on my podcast, on my channel, Animal Cool Studios, there is a whole ass thing where I go break down it chapter by chapter as I recount in that one with Jake. As I was reading it, I gave Jake a chapter by chapter analysis. Every time I finished a chapter, I'd text him on Discord going, "This is what I thought. This was interesting. This or that." And it was quite fun, because this is the only book to date that I've been able to actually talk with the author on chapter by chapter.
You both live,
and then I continued.
And then after that point, we did do that big episode, which I'll link right below, where we just like sit down and like, I think like character by character, we just went through it, and it was just really fun.
I don't understand why every single fucking piece of media since 2000 has been so obsessed with making the coolest fucking werewolves and then just making them servants of vampires or Dracula, or like they just get fucking neutered and shit. I don't get it. And Jake, why did you do that? You had Gwen, an awesome werewolf with this cool like secondary conscious in her. I don't know what that was, but it was cool. You had all that, and then you just you take it all away right before they fight. Where the fuck's my werewolf?
Okay, all right.
You can't tell me I'm wrong on that.
To respond to what is a wonderfully passionate intro here, I gotta say, I would argue I did give you every version of a werewolf over the course of the story. So I gave you the big, huge
Jack
Van Helsing ones that I love. I
don't
gave
love
you the
those,
Larry
but yeah.
Talbots with the makeup. I love, yeah. And that I gave you the Larry Talbots with the the sideburns and stuff that are kind of muscular and fast. I gave you those. And then with Gwen, I downplayed it a lot because she's more in the context of these other characters. But in the House of Imprisoner, which is a chapter that you've got on record saying is
I love House of the Imprisoner.
I gave you classic Larry Talbot werewolf, man, and I gave everyone everyone at the same time.
You did. That part was so cool, and then you get rid of it, and I'm like, what the hell? Where's my werewolf? We discussed the whole book. We discussed the chapters, and then at the end, just for fun, I did a whole ranking of every character. So there's a tier list. There's the official tier list for all the best characters and the worst characters and the whole list. And the one thing I will say is justice for fucking Waylon. Justice for Waylon.
Waylon accomplished his lifelong goal and dream. He had the Underlord dead to rights with that gun, and then he watched it happen, and he lowered the gun because he knew that he had won, and he had accomplished his mission. So at that point, who cares?
Go fuck yourself, Jake. I don't give a fuck. I want a better ending for Waylon.
All right.
I'm gonna fucking write my own version of it. I'm just kidding.
But no, it was an interesting experience having watched the Monster Thon beforehand, because every other chapter I'm like, oh, I know what you're doing. The one chapter that opens with Vera West, age 6. I'm like, oh my god.
I will say.
Yeah, go on.
Oh no, I will say it's very obvious, like the characters you find most interesting for which is probably the most unique thing, is that the characters you find more of an affinity to are the ones people would not expect, which is the Brute Man and the Ape Woman.
Yeah, so I basically took those like
are.
B and D and Z list characters that are technically Universal monsters with their own trilogies, and I elevated them to the ranks of, say, Dracula or Frankenstein in the terms of their like stable of characters.
I would say you elevated them even further because you actually made them really interesting, and I could tell the passion you have for them.
Yeah.
I mean, like, you say Dracula's your favorite character, but my God, based off the Brute Man, I'm like, this man saw something in the Brute Man and in the Ape Woman that no one else will ever see, and I have to commend you the most for that. I think that's some really good writing. Those are your strongest characters out of all of them. Besides Waylon. Waylon's the best character. Justice for Waylon.
I also think Waylon is probably my favorite character in the book, and he's not even a monster. But like, yeah. I'm also in the mindset of like, I don't really want to prioritize like every character needs an arc, right? Maybe not every character gets one because of just how many pages are left in the damn book. But I went up to like 350. There's a reason that like it's behind the scenes stuff, but like I profit like $1 or $2 less than I would have if it had been sub 300 pages. But I was like, fuck that. I want the whole unbridled experience. I'd rather the book be what I want the book to be and just whatever. But regardless, you're totally right about that. I definitely did treat them with the same going into it the same like level of status as the rest, and then as the book got written, I'm like, oh, there's so much more here that hasn't been touched. Like what I did with the Brute Man was the movies themselves, there's not a whole lot to go off of. It's just a tall dude that kills people, but the real story of those movies are behind the scenes. Like Rondo Hatton had this horrible disfigurement which ended up killing him early, because acromegaly usually does if you don't treat it. And the producers were just like, great, he looks weird, throw him in movies as a monster, and then we'll just make like 3 of them in a row and 2 after he's dead. Like, who cares? Like, it just feels so heartless and soulless that I was like, well, that is the story I want to tell. So I told the story of a man afflicted with that disease that like kind of pains him constantly all the time, and the only way he's allowed out of it is through this like weird scenario. And that really drove that character. And then, of course, the fact that he's a hunter was really useful for me because he hunts all of the other characters on the book at a certain point. So that's really helpful in terms of like just story-wise.
Tying them all together.
Hoxton, what I found funny was because when I first read his first chapter, I was like, oh, this is really boring out there and stuff. And like really kind of, I was really mid, but like as the book goes on, I really learned to love Hoxton. I was like, okay, I'm really into this character.
Thank you.
And Ape Woman was almost the same. I just found the story pretty like good in terms of like a scary kind of story. And I love the way you do the action. I thought the action was really, really well written in this book. And I still think about Black's Lagoon chapter, where it's just Hoxton versus a creature from the Black Lagoon, and I'm like, holy shit, this is insane.
That was something.
Yeah, that's the closest. That's the closest you came to just straight ripping them off, was when you called it the creature from Black's Lagoon.
Black apostrophe yes. Yeah, no, I wanted to tip the hat, as it were. By the way, there's some.
That was a total Asylum moment.
Dracula, where he accidentally did the whole World Wars. No, so there's a lot of references that you guys obviously have picked up on. With like, say, the Universal Monster Thon, I put that there were 16 degrees all in a 4x4 grid on the wall of different universities and stuff, which is a direct reference to 2020 Invisible Man, which we kind of harped on in that commentary. But then there's some like actual like deeper lore connections there, like the Underlord's names. He has a lot of different names throughout history. They're all anagrams of each other, not anagrams of each other, where the letters can be rearranged. Like Bractermos was his name back then, and then Sam Bertrock was it's all the same letters scrambled, and that goes up to today with Robert Max or Max. I forget which last name I did there, but they all get scrambled throughout human history. Every like century or so, he'll like make a new identity out of those same letters, and those letters anagram to Bram Stoker. So that's the initial implication there. That's why. And
that's cool.
So it's you doing a more sophisticated version of Alucard.
Yes, like Alucard is like the 10 seconds spent on that done. I was like, I wanna pay tribute to where it belongs, which is Stoker, who gave the world one of the, I think, the greatest literary character of all time. The character names that I chose were usually based off of the actors who had played the characters in Universal film. So, like, the three brides were Iona, Hope, and Lillian, and those are the three names of Bela Lugosi's real life wives. He had four wives, but two had the same name, so it was actually only three names that I could choose from. So it was fair enough right there. A lot of the supporting characters in the book, like Ilif Fry was the first mate on the ship. His name is Dwight Ilif Fry, the actor who plays Renfield, obviously. So I took that because he kind of becomes a Renfield-esque character by the end of that story. So it's just littered with stuff like that. Just all kinds of like tips of the hat. This is where, we're not basing it off of that literally. We're just like acknowledging like the ones that have come before. And I take stuff from the literary source too and stuff like that. I just wanted this to be like the ultimate love letter to that canon of film history of like, these are the characters. This is like what they could be doing right now. And I wanted that all to just pay tribute. I wear my influences on my sleeve. Yeah, you could say.
Right.
Gwen Siodmai.
Yeah. Yeah, it was funny.
I will also say that to this day, that your interpretation of the Invisible Man as a suit is still the only one that I actually find intriguing and acceptable as a thing. That everything else where it's like, oh, the Invisible Man is just it's a suit, it's not an actual thing. You're the only one where it's like, I accept it and I like it because even though it's a suit, you have the character choose to never take it off, which kind of goes into what I believe the one of the true like things about that make the Invisible Man is that there's this power of invisibility, but to get it, to have that ultimate insane amount of power, you have to give yourself up. You have that's why turning it into a serum, making your actual body that way, is so intriguing. Is that you have to give up that to achieve that level of power. And making a suit takes that away. You can take off the suit whenever you want. You can become your regular self whenever you want. But the way you did it with Jack is that it's a suit, but he refuses to ever take off this suit. So there's still that whole thing where like, okay, yeah, it's a suit. Yeah, he can become visible whenever he wants, but he chooses not to. He chooses to take this power and have it become himself.
Yep.
There are some implications to him not taking that suit off. Like, ooh.
Yeah. Well, yeah, because like.
But that's what makes it so good.
Thank you. Yeah, there was a reason that like at the end of the book when he wakes up from the injury, he has so many questions he could ask, like, where am I? What the hell happened? What's going on? The only 3 words out of his mouth, where's my suit? Those are the only line of dialogue he has to like end that chapter there. It's because that's the only thing he really cares about.
And yes, Bruce, you're right. The implications are like, oh God, all those kind of things. But that's the point. It's this thing where it's like this suit has this insane power of invisibility and stuff, and this man refuses to take it off because he refuses to let go of the power that it contains. He refuses to let go of what it allows him to do, and he loses his identity in that suit. And I love that so much. That is exactly the point that H.G. Wells is trying to say, and you did H.G. Wells justice.
Thank you. I certainly try to do all the authors justice that have come before me and standing on the shoulders of many, many giants.
Yeah, speaking of H.G. Wells, I thought it was interesting how the Ape Woman story basically turns into the Island of Dr. Moreau.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah!
It did. That was an intentional decision on my part. I kind of saw, because Dr. Moreau has that one Universal adaptation that sometimes is included in like the Universal horror line, but it's really never addressed again and never brought up. But I was like, damn, if I were to include another one that like should be a Universal monster but never got an adaptation or never got part of that series, you're thinking about like Dorian Gray, stuff like that. Dr. Moreau is right up there. Like that's one of those stories that totally could have been like a legendary, iconic, thing.
That's a great book too.
It's really fun. It's got a lot of like.
I need to read that book.
A lot of really cool world building, a lot of in-universe rules and logic that I really enjoy in that book.
The other thing I thought was kind of funny was your Phantom character. It almost felt like I was seeing you address your complaints about the Phantom of the Opera character on the page. Because I remember those Phantom of the Opera videos. It's like, he's not a ghost. He's just a guy. He's the asshole of the opera.
Yeah.
So, I will admit that by the end of the book, the Phantom character is 100% the least like the source. It's like virtually not even the same. He's not even in an opera house. He's on an opera house sometimes. There's in the notebook at the end of the book, it's referenced that the opera house burned down, and that is the ashes of whatever. But I never wrote that story. Like, I never told the story of him in the opera house because I liked the idea that I wove him into the Gargoyles story and had their fates intertwined, and I like that a lot better because then that gives them a significant moment towards the end of the book, and I didn't want like a separate continuity, especially because he's so minor. He becomes like a secondary villain, and he's not even in the big chapter 18 because he's stuck in his cell. He just has to stand there and watch everyone happen. Chapter 18, by the way, the last 3 pages of chapter 18 are probably my favorite thing I've ever written so far in my life. That's like...
Was that the chapter that after I finished it, I said this is one of the best chapters in the entire book?
Yes, it is. Yeah, that's the one. So I love that. Going into the book, before I even knew what the book was going to be at that point, I was like, there's a moment that I need this to happen. So I need to, as clever as a story as I can construct, as talented as I can possibly make this, I need to build properly so that this happens, and it's not just action for action's sake, it's ultimate payoff. So I threw it in there and hit you with it. So I was very proud of that.
Personally, I like that the Phantom became an actual Phantom because I think it's always fun that like in this world, in like these like Universal monsters and stuff, there's not an actual like kind of like ghost, and it was just kind of fun to like see like a classic kind of ghost.
Yes, that was another thing. I wanted like one of everything. I wanted one of every single type of conventional movie monster or series monster. I think I hit them all except like kaiju and shit because it's human scale.
Yeah.
But I think I hit every general type.
Gotta save that for the sequel.
I still to this day, probably one of the best scenes I've ever read is just right before he dies. He goes into the astral plane, and it's with the Phantom, right? Is that who he's with? Mm-hmm. Yeah, yep. And he's with the Phantom, and the guy's like, "What the fuck are you doing? You're not gonna be able to get out of this. Like, what are you doing?" And it's just like he's just standing there, and he's like. And it's just the simple words. It's just the way you wrote it was so beautiful. He just goes, "I don't want to die again."
Yep.
And beautiful.
Thank you.
Beautiful writing. It was just there's nothing you can't top that. It's just characters on the screen. I don't want to die again.
First of all, thank you so much. That means a lot. I had written, because that's a 2-part chapter finale of the kind of all the stories that have come before, and I had written that without that scene, and I thought, like, that's okay, but there's still more I can do with this character. Like, there's still a little bit more, I guess, a conclusion to that character story that I could add there. I really wanted it to be like a character-driven moment, and I think, if you're saying I succeeded, I appreciate that, but I certainly hope I succeeded with how I pulled that off.
Me personally, it moved me to...
Thank you.
It moved me.
Thank you.
To a bigger house.
Yeah, it moved him to a different location. But yeah. Thank you. That means a lot. Yeah, that's the Devil's League. And that finally will conclude this episode of our show, in which we talk about every piece of Universal Monster novel tie-in that we have read or seen. And guys, this is a behemoth of an episode. Look, there might just not even be a news segment. This is huge. Real quick, before we end the show, I just want to ask a quick question. What's your least favorite tie-in book?
Return of the Wolfman's favorite, and so far my least favorite has just been Dracula Asylum. Fuck it.
Fair enough.
My favorite is Shadow of Frankenstein. My least favorite is The Devil's League. Just kidding.
No!
It's Wolfman versus Dracula.
Oh, yeah. I forgot that we're counting that. Okay, I had a different answer, but my new least favorite answer is The Wolfman versus Dracula. That is easily the worst one on the list. My favorite, I'm going to disqualify my own book. I feel like that's not fair. My favorite is probably the tie-in to Van Helsing for what it did for that film, but with the caveat that I haven't finished Turn of the Wolfman yet. I've barely started it. That, from the way it's reading so far, could become number 1 for me of the list. So I'll just say that. So that'll just about conclude the episode, and thank you guys for watching. See you guys next time.
Bye.
I'll be seeing
Where's
you
your
again.
sense of adventure? Where's your sense of
Yeah, I knew it. I was waiting for you both to do it, and you both... All right, fine. I guess that's our thing now. Goodbye.